Hello everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we are going to be doing my November 2021 collection update. Now I know this is coming out a little bit later than expected. It's actually December when I'm recording this and when this is going up. I plan to have this out the last Tuesday of November, which was the last day of November, but sadly complications came up and I wasn't able to publish it on time. But we have the video out now, so better late than never. And as you can see by this video, you can see that this isn't my entire collection. This is my narrow body collection. We've now got to the point where my entire collection doesn't fit on this one table, so I'm going to be doing this in two halves of one video. The first half is this half. We're going to go through my narrow body collection, and then the second half is going to be my wide body collection. There's a few aircraft that don't exactly fit the bill. For example, there'll be some that are technically narrow bodies that we're going to put in with the wide body. Some military aircraft, like for example the P-8s, which are based on the Boeing 737, which is of course a narrow body. I just decided to put all my military aircraft into the wide body section anyway. And as well as that, we also have the Concorde, which again is a narrow body aircraft, but it just fits into the more wide body and long haul section of this kind of collection video. But here we have the majority of my narrow body aircraft, so all the aircraft that have one aisle within the fuselage. So this is anything from any regional jets all the way up to the 757. I have a grand total of 338 aircraft in my collection now, so it's definitely growing, and we're not going to be stopping here. Of course, I do one of these every November and May, so the next video will be May 2022. But with that being said, let's just go ahead now and get started with this collection update for November 2021. Starting off with two of the smallest aircraft, here we have two of the United Express -8 200s in the Continental livery. Next we have three of the United Express CRJ 200s in the new, also known as the Evo Blue livery. We then have three of the United Express CRJ 550s in the new livery. These are amazing models. We then have two of the United Express Embraer 170s. These are in the old Continental livery. And then after that we have two of the old livery United Express Embraer 175s. These are slightly longer than the Embraer 170s, and they also have the enhanced winglets. Then next up we have three of the exact same aircraft, but these are just in the new livery. We have three of the United Express Embraer 175s. Then next up, as you can see, we have a lot of United A319s. We have 6 in total. The two closest to you, the two that are in focus now, those are the Panda models A319s, and then the 4 that are further away, those are the Gemini Jets versions. Then next up here we have the United A320s in the old Continental livery. We have yet to have any good releases of the United A320 in the new livery. I say good because Air Classics has released a United A320 in the new livery, but it's not exactly the best of quality, so I think I'm just going to wait for one of the better manufacturers to release a new livery United A320. Then next up here, moving on to the second line of United aircraft, here we have all of my 737s as well as others at the end. We have a grand total of 12 737s. So starting off here, we have two of the older livery United 737-800s. These are actually two separate releases. You can kind of see it in the color. This one is a little bit of a more of a creamy color. This one's a bit more kind of pure white there. And I don't exactly know when these were released. I know this one was, I think, 2019, and then this one was, I want to say, maybe 2 years before that, maybe 2017, maybe even 2016. After that, we then have two of the United Star Alliance 737-800s. These are in the new livery. The way you can tell is because of the blue engines. The old Star Alliance livery is pretty much exactly the same, except it doesn't have the blue engines and the blue winglets. I only ordered one of these originally, but I ended up getting two. There's a long story behind that. I won't go into it now, but yeah, I have two of these Star Alliance 737-800s. Then next up, we have three of the Gemini Jets United 737-800s in the new livery. We then have another two United 737-800s in the new livery, but these are the NG versions. We then have one of my oldest models. This is my second United model I ever got after my 747. This is the very old United 737-900 in the old Continental livery. We then have the United 737-900 in the Eco Skies livery. This is actually very similar to the new livery on one of their 737 MAX aircraft that they recently operated the first 100% sustainable fuel flight on. So it's pretty interesting. This is like the OG livery of that livery that we have now. But then after that, here we have my only United 737 MAX model. This is my United 737 MAX 9. Then next up here we have my United Herrat here livery 757-200s. On the left we have the New York livery, and then on the right there we have the California livery. We then have my old Continental livery 757-200. And then finally here for United's narrowbodies, here we have the United 757-300. Next up, moving on to American, here we have two American Eagle CRJ 200s. We then have an American Eagle CRJ 700. We then have two American Eagle Embraer 175s. We have an American One World 737-800, a regular 737-800, an American 737 MAX 8. We have an American A320, an American A321, an American A321 Neo, and then finally here for American we have an American 757-200. Then moving on to the last three of the big American airlines, we have Delta. On the left there we have a Delta Connection CRJ 200, and on the right we have an Embraer 170. We then have a Delta 717, a Delta MD-90. We then have two Delta 737-800s, a Delta 737-900, a Delta A220-100, a Delta A319, a Delta A321, a Delta 757-200 without the winglets, and then a Delta 757-200 with winglets. Next up here we have a JetBlue A320. We then have two of the JetBlue Airbus A321s. We have a JetBlue Airbus A321LR. We have a Spirit Airbus A320 Neo, a Spirit Airbus A321. This is the NG version without the Wi-Fi box. And then we have the Spirit Airbus A321 with the Wi-Fi box, which is the Gemini Jets version. Next up, moving on to my very first narrowbody model, here we have the Alaska Airlines 737-800 in the Salmon 30 Salmon livery. We have the Alaska 737-800 in the Honoring Those Who Serve livery. We have the Alaska 737-800 in the regular livery. We have the Alaska 737-900 in the Education Change the World livery. We then have the Alaska Airbus A320 and the Alaska Airbus A321 Neo. Then next up here we have the Frontier A320, the Frontier Airbus A320 Neo, and then finally here the Frontier A321. Next up here, moving on to Southwest, here we have the Southwest Airlines 737-700 in the Colorado 1 color scheme. We then have the Southwest Airlines 737-700 in the Triple Crown 1 livery. We then have the Southwest Airlines 737-700 in the Louisiana 1 color scheme. We then have the Southwest Airlines 737-700 in the Tennessee 1 color scheme. We then have the Southwest Airlines Florida 1 color scheme. And then finally here for the state liveries, we have the Illinois 1 color scheme. We have three more of them on order. We have the Maryland 1 color scheme, the Lone Star 1 color scheme, and the California 1 color scheme. So those will all be in the next collection update in 6 months' time. Next up here we have the Desert Gold Retro color scheme. Next up here we have two of my oldest Southwest models. We have two, these are two separate releases, but we have two of the 737-700s in the Canyon Blue color scheme. I believe the one on the left is a 2008 release and the one on the right is either a 2012 or 2013 release. I know it's one of the, if not the last Southwest model to be released before Southwest got the Heart livery. And then next up here we have one of my favorite models. This is the Southwest Airlines 737-700 with the split scimitars. This is from NG Models and this is an absolutely beautiful model. We then have the Southwest Airlines 737-800 in the Canyon Blue livery without split scimitars. And then we have the Southwest Airlines 737-800 in the Canyon Blue livery with split scimitars. Next up, moving on to the Heart livery or the new livery. Here we have the Southwest Airlines 737-700 in the Heart livery, as I said. I'm still waiting on NG Models to release a new livery 737-700. I know Panda Models released one a little while back, but I'm specifically waiting for NG Models because I loved their 737-700 in the Canyon Blue livery, and I think I'm going to love it in the Heart livery as well. After that, we then have two of the 737-800s in the Heart livery from NG Models. We then have the Southwest Airlines 737 MAX 8. Then here we have the Southwest Airlines 737-800 in the 50th anniversary color scheme. And then finishing off with the US Airlines, we then have Sun Country. We have the Sun Country 737-800 in the old livery. And then finally here we have the Sun Country 737-800 in the new livery, also known as the Tide Pod livery. Then moving on to my small Central and South American fleet. On the left there, we have a Copa Airlines 737-800 without the split scimitars. And then on the right, we have another Copa Airlines 737-800, but this time this is the one with split scimitars. We then have the Aeromexico 737-800, the Volaris Airbus A320neo, and then finally here we have the Avianca A321. This is in fact my only custom model that I have. I typically don't try and go for custom models just because I prefer the real thing from a manufacturer, and so as soon as I get that new Avianca A321neo from Gemini Jets, this model is going to be leaving my collection and the A321neo will be joining my collection in this one's place. So I cannot wait to get my hands on that new Gemini Jets Avianca A321neo. Although the A321neo doesn't exactly come to the DC area, it's mainly A320s and even the A319. I just want some sort of Avianca narrowbody aircraft because I can't continue with this horrible custom model. Next up, moving up north to Canada, here we have the WestJet 737-800. We then have the Air Canada Rouge A321. We then have the regular Air Canada A321. We then have the Air Canada 737 MAX 8. The Air Canada Express Embraer 175. This is the old version of the Embraer 175 without the enhanced winglets. The Air Canada Express CRJ 900. The Air Canada Express CRJ 200. And the Porter Q400. Next up we have the American Chrome MD-83, the American Chrome 757-200, the American Chrome One World 757-200, the Omni Air International Charter 757-200, the National Geographic 757-200, the La Campagnie 757-200, the Four Seasons 757-200, the Air Corio Tupolev 204-300, and the Air Corio IL-62M. Next up, moving on to some European aircraft now. Here we have the British Airways City Flyer Embraer 170. We then have the British Airways 737-200 in the Animals and Trees livery. We have the British Airways 737-200 in the Stern-Taller livery. We then have the British Airways Airbus A321, the British Airways 757-200, the British Airways 757-200 in the Chelsea Rose colour scheme, the British Airways 757-200 in the Scottish Tartan livery, and then finally here for British Airways we have the British Airways 757-200 in the Blue Pool livery. Next up here we have the Icelandair Boeing 757-300 in the 100 Years of Independence for Iceland livery. We then have the Icelandair 757-200 in the 80th anniversary for Icelandair livery. We then have the Icelandair 757-200 in the Hekla Aurora livery. We then have the Icelandair 757-200 in the retro colour scheme. We then have the Icelandair 757-200 in the current colour scheme. We then have the Icelandair 737 MAX 8. We then have the WOW Air Airbus A321neo, the Wizz Air A321, the EasyJet A321neo. We then have the Aer Lingus A321neo. We then have the Boeing Business Jet 737-700, the Alaska Air Cargo 737-400. We then have the Aerosecure Columbia 727, the FedEx 757-200, the DHL 757-200, the DHL 757-200 in the Jeremy Clarkson livery, and then finally here we have the DHL 757-200 in the James May livery. Then next up, moving on to my wide body collection. Starting off down here, we have the BOAC Retro livery, British Airways 747-400. We then have the Negus British Airways Retro livery, 747-400. And then next up here, while I do use this as my Retro Landor aircraft, this isn't the Retro Landor livery. This is an actual Landor livery. This is Victor India. This was used during the 80s and 90s, so this is the actual Landor livery, if that makes sense, and not the Retro livery. livery. And then next up here we have one of my British Airways 747-400s in the Chatham Dockyard livery. This one is actually one of the older Chatham Dockyard aircraft. The two reasons you can tell is firstly, it doesn't have the crown emblem behind the titles there, and also if you look at the first class cabins, you'll see they're all individual windows. I believe they changed this around 2010, about that time, so they have suites in the first class cabin. My next 747 is this one, and this is one of the newer British Airways 747s. As you can see in the first class cabins, you have some of the windows blocked out, and that's because of course they had the suites versus the old style first class cabin. So this one is one of my newer 747s. Following on from that, we have another one of these newer 747s. We then next up here have one of the One World livery British Airways 747s. Next up here we have one of the British Asia Airways 747s in the Chelsea Rose livery. We then have one of the British Airways 747s in the Scottish Tartan livery. We then have another British Airways 747 in the Delft Blue Daybreak livery. We then have another British Airways 747 in the Indbelly Emily livery. We then have a British Airways 747 in the Rendezvous livery. We then have a British Airways 747 in the Nalangi Dreaming livery. And then finally here for the British Airways 747-400s, we have the Woonala Dreaming British Airways 747. Moving on after that, here we have a British Airways Boeing 777-300ER. We then have a British Airways Boeing 777-200ER. We then have a British Airways Boeing 787-10, a British Airways Boeing 787-9, a British Airways Boeing 787-8, and a British Airways Boeing 767-300. Moving on to our Concords now, we have 3 British Airways Concords. These are all separate registrations. I don't know which is which without looking at the registration, of course, but I know one is BOAC, one is BOAF, and one is BOAB. And then in the back there, if you can see, we have also an Air France Concorde, which is an off-brand one. I'm really hoping Gemini Jets re-release the Air France Concorde, because the Air France Concorde is actually a really hard one to find versus the British Airways ones. I mean, it's pretty blatant that the British Airways ones are easy to find, considering I have 3 of them. Next up, here we have the Phoenix British Airways A350-1000. This isn't a very nice model, hence why I bought 2 more A350s on top of this. Then after that, here we have another British Airways A350-1000. This is the first edition Gemini Jets British Airways A350. The reason why I then bought another one is because this was released before British Airways actually got the A350. So Gemini Jets got a few things wrong, not really their fault because of course this aircraft didn't exist when this was released, but a few things like, for example, the titles are a little bit incorrect in size, and also there's no marking on the winglet there. And so my third and final British Airways A350 is this one. This is the second edition Gemini Jets one, and this one is perfect. Essentially this is the same as the one before, but they just got the markings right. So as you can see, the markings on the front are larger, and we have the markings on the winglets as well. Next up, here we have the Gemini Jets British Airways A380. This one is GXLED. And then next up here we have the Phoenix British Airways A380, which isn't the best of models. As you can see, it's got a bit of a nose gear issue, but this one is GXLEI, which is a British Airways A380 I've flown in real life, so I have some sentimental attachment to this model, which is why I haven't gotten rid of it yet. Next up, moving on to Air France, here we have the Air France A380, the now retired Air France A380. Despite that, I do want to get another one just because this one is broken, well, slightly. The winglet on the other side there is damaged, and this model actually came like that years ago now. This is actually the first A380 I got into my collection, and it arrived broken, but I just haven't gotten a new one yet, so I do actually want to get a new Air France A380 at some point. Next up, here we have the Air France Boeing 777-300ER, the Air France Boeing 777-200ER, the Air France A350-900, and the Air France A340-300. Next, moving on to Lufthansa, here we have the Lufthansa 747-8i, we have the Lufthansa Boeing 747-400 in the new livery, the Lufthansa 747-400 in the old livery, the Lufthansa A340-600, the Lufthansa A340-300, the Lufthansa A350-900, And then finally for Lufthansa, we have two of their Airbus A330-300s. We have the NG Models version on the right and the Gemini Jets version on the left. Next up, we have the Virgin Atlantic 747-400. The Virgin Atlantic 787-9, the Virgin Atlantic A330-300, the Brussels A330-300. We then have the Aeroflot A330-300, the Swiss A330-300, the Aer Lingus A330-300 in the new livery, the Aer Lingus A330-200 in the old livery, the Alitalia A330-200, the TAP Portugal A330-200, the Austrian 767-300, the Austrian 777-200, the Turkish A330-200, the Turkish 787-9, the KLM 787-9, the KLM A330-300, the Finnair One World A350-900, the Scandinavian A350-900 by Phoenix, the Scandinavian A350-900 by NG Models, the Iberia A350-900, and then finally here for my European models we have the EasyJet Airbus A350-900, which is of course a fictional model. Next up, moving on to Africa and then on to Asia, here we have the South African A340-600. We then have the South African A350-900, the South African A330-300, the Egypt Air 787-9, the Ethiopian 777-200LR, the Ethiopian 787-9, the Ethiopian 787-8, the Royal Air Maroc 787-8 in the old livery, the Royal Air Maroc 787-8 in the new One World livery, the Royal Air Maroc 787-9 in the new livery, the Emirates A380, the Emirates 777-300ER, the Saudi Arabian 777-300ER, the Air India 777-300ER, the Air China 777-300ER, the ANA 777-300ER, the ANA 2020 livery 777-200, the ANA Star Wars R2-D2 livery 787-9, the JAL or Japan Airlines 787-9. In the front there we have the Korean Air 787-9, and then in the back there we have the Korean Air 777-300. That's my only non-ER version of the 777-300. We then have the One World livery Qatar 777-300ER, the Qatar One World livery A350-900, the regular Qatar A350-900. We then have the Cathay Pacific A350-1000, the Etihad 787-9, the Vietnam Airlines 787-9, the Air New Zealand 787-9, the Air New Zealand 747-400, the El Al 747-400. Then moving on to some of my retro models, here we have the Qantas 747SP, we have the United Seoul Bass 747SP, the Pan Am 747SP, the beautiful Gulf Air L1011, the Avianca A330-200, and then here we have my pretty large fleet of Interactive Series 747-8. So going through these, here we have the Polar Air Cargo 747-8, which is also a DHL Partners 747-8. We have an Atlas Air 747-8. I'm not going to bother with the 747-8 for all of these. And we have a Cargolux one. We have a Cargolux Mask livery 747. We have an Airbridge Cargo or ABC Cargo 747, a UPS 747, and then I may as well hit these up as well. We have a UPS MD-11, a UPS 767-300, and a FedEx 767-300 as well. Moving on to United, here we have two of the new livery 767-300s. We then have one of the old livery United 767-300s. We then have one of the old livery United 787-8s. Then hiding behind here we have two of the new livery United 787-9s. Two of the new livery 787-10s. We then have an old livery United 787-10. We then have two new livery United 777-200s. An old livery 777-200ER. On the left there we have a new livery 777-300ER, and then on the right we have an old livery 777-300ER. And then finally for United we have my oldest United model. We have the United 747-400. Then for Hawaiian, on the right there we have a Hawaiian A330-200, and then on the left we have a Hawaiian 787-9. And then completing my wide-body section, on the right there we have a Volga Denimper Antonov 124, and then on the left we have an Antonov Airlines Antonov 225. Then next up here, moving on to the military section, here we have the C5 Super Galaxy. This one in particular is a San Antonio C5. Following on from that, here we have a Dover Air Force Base C5 Super Galaxy. Then next up here we have a strategic to airlift capability C-17. This is a multinational C-17 that helps with kind of humanitarian issues around the world. And then next up here, just as the sun decides to show itself for the first time today, here we have a Royal Air Force C-17. We then have a People's Liberation Army Air Force Y-20, also known as a Chinese Air Force Y-20. Then next up here we have another People's Liberation Army Air Force aircraft. This is an IL-76. Then next up here, moving on to the A400M, here we have a Royal Air Force A400M. Then next up here we have a Luftwaffe A400M. And then here we have a French Air Force A400M. Next, moving on to the C-130s, here we have a Royal Netherlands Air Force C-130. This is the extended version of the C-130. Next up here we then have a Royal Air Force C-130, a Japanese Air Self-Defense Force C-130, a US Coast Guard C-130, and finally a Blue Angel C-130. Then next up here we have two of the new P-8 Poseidons. On the left there we have a US Navy P-8 Poseidon, and on the right we have a Royal Air Force P-8 Poseidon. Next up here, moving on to the bombers, here we have two B-1 bombers. On the left there we have a Dyess Air Force Base B-1, and on the right we have an Ellsworth Base B-1. Gemini Jets have also recently released the B-52. I have ordered that, so I should be getting that pretty soon, and I will of course do an unboxing of that when I get it. I'm very excited to finally have the B-52, the B1 and the B2 all in my collection. It would still be good for Gemini Jets to release a B2, because the B2 that I'm about to show you isn't the best of quality. It's a bit battered and, you know, it's not the best. But regardless, here we have it. We have the US Air Force B2 Spirit Bomber. We then have the Virgin Galactic VSS Unity. We then have 4 F-117 Nighthawks. Then next up here, moving on to transport aircraft, here we have the US Air Force E-4B Doomsday plane. We then have the German A350-900. We then have two Royal Air Force A330 MRTTs. On the left we have the Union Jack livery A330, and on the right we have the grey regular livery A330. Then the same here with France. On the left there we have the presidential livery A330-200, and on the right in the shadows there we have the regular grey livery A330-200 MRTT. Then here we have the Turkish government A330-200. We then have two of the Royal Air Force VC-10s. We then have an Omega tanker Boeing 707, a Royal New Zealand Air Force 757-200, a US Air Force C-32. Then finally here we have two US Air Force KC-135s. On the left we have an Arizona National Guard KC-135, and then on the right we have a Hawaiian National Guard KC-135. But apart from that, I want to thank you all for watching today's video, especially if you made it all the way to the end. And apart from that, as I said, I want to thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.